I pretend I don't know about my friend's secret group chat where they mock me. I'm Ron 28M, and I'm currently living with a roommate, Emma, fake names 27F. She is my younger sister's best friend, and I know her since we were kids. Originally, my sister was living with us, but she left to study abroad, and now she lives there with her fiance. It's her late aunt's apartment, so she lets me stay there without paying rent, but we share bills and chores. Great deal if you ask me. I never had a problem with me and Emma living together. There were never any romantic feelings both ways. I respected her boyfriends, and she respected my girlfriends. I think of her as part of my family, like a sister. 2 months ago, while she was taking a shower, I saw a notification on her phone with my name on it, and I looked at it and it said, "I found the perfect girl for Ron's prank." I got curious and opened her phone since I know her passcode. There I saw how basically all our mutual friends, except a few I had from my army days, and my childhood best friend who lives in another city, were all members of a group chat that started a month ago, and there they were all sharing memes and gifs, mocking me about my appearance. And basically I became equivalent of ugly to them. I couldn't understand why they were so mean, since I genuinely thought we had a good relationship and friendship. As I was scrolling all the way back, I found out that everything started after my roommate told one of her friends that she's so horny, she's thinking of effing the old and fat hobo who's sleeping on our rooftop sometimes. Her friend replied that I'm single too, and she could F me, and my roommate answered that she's not that desperate yet, and they both share laughing emojis and stuff. Then they kept at it by posting puking emojis when they talked, how they imagine I had sex. Then other friends started getting into the joke, and soon they created an entire group just so they can share humiliating posts about me. They even started using "I'd rather F the hobo" as an aside joke, which I heard them say a few times but didn't know what it meant until now. I was standing there reading all these comments feeling numb and not knowing how to react. They also planned to put a prank on me. They would have a really pretty girl flirt with me and ask me out, and when I would go to the date she would stood me up and they would have a bet of how long would I wait for her. Obviously, since I knew their plans, I rejected the girls' advances to, I imagine all of them, surprise. Now, I'm not insecure about my appearance. I know I'm not good looking, but I never had trouble finding girls, and despite what they wrote, they didn't make me feel ugly or sorry for myself. I'm just hurt that they would do something like that, since I never did anything to warrant such mockery. Of course, I'm more hurt about Emma, and I'm mostly confused since I know she cares a lot about me. 3 years ago, I had a motorcycle accident, and she practically slept in the hospital for the 10 days I was there. And after we came back home, she helped me all the time until I got better, so I don't know why she would do something so mean towards me. Personally, I think it was just a joke comment that got out of hand. After that, I stopped hanging out with them. I started using work as an excuse, but I limited my interactions with all of them, including Emma. If I knew they'd be at home, I'd stay longer at work or go for a walk until they left, or I'd go out with my other friends. If they suggest a night out, I'd say I was tired from work or sick and wouldn't go. I've cried a few times I stayed home thinking about the whole situation. Emma asked me the other day if everything is all right, and I told her I had some pressure at work since I'm aiming for a promotion. That's not a lie, actually. Our company is opening a new branch on another city, and I was originally asked to relocate there. But I declined since I would be all alone and had to start my social circle from zero. But after that, I talked with my boss, and I agreed to relocate once the facilities are ready, which is January 2025, according to schedule. I haven't told anyone about this yet. The reason for this post is that about a week ago, I once again looked at her phone to see if they keep the group chat. There I saw that they kept making fun of me, but some of them pointed out that I stopped interacting with them and wondered if I was all right or something happened to me. One even asked if there's a chance I know about them making fun of me. But they all dismissed that, saying they haven't said anything, and they even dared to say that even if I knew, it's all harmless anyways. Emma told them about my promotion, and that convinced them that I'm just stressed about work, and then they continued mocking me with memes, this time about my job. I don't even know their motives at this point. I don't get it at all. I realize that there's no going back anymore. But I also realize that in the last 2 months, I haven't had any fun, so my plan now is to keep pretending I don't know anything, but start hanging out with them again, because since I won't see them anymore after 5 months, I can at least have some fun. I used to like going out with them, so for the next few months, I can pretend they're still my friends. We actually do plan to go out all together to see a movie, and then for some drinks. When time comes and I'm ready to leave, I'll leave without informing anyone, including Emma. Once I'm out and away, I'll block them all, besides Emma. Since I care about her and want her to know that despite anything, I'm there for her. And if anyone tries to contact me or pretend they care about me leaving, I'll simply send Emma the screenshots of their chat, and I hope this will shut them up. That's not a lie, actually. Our company is opening a new branch on another city, and I was originally asked to relocate there, but I declined since I would be all alone and had to start my social circle from zero. But after that, I talked with my boss, and I agreed to relocate once the facilities are ready, which is January 2025, according to schedule. I haven't told anyone about this yet.
My partner has cheated on me with our assistant. We've been together 13 years. He wants to leave and explore his feelings for her. Do I let him go, or fight for us? Life is often an unexpected intertwining of stories, where joy and pain walk hand in hand. Our relationship, once, was like a thrilling novel. We were the kind of couple who could unravel any mystery, overcome any challenge. We laughed, planned for the future, and were the team that everyone who believes in love dreams of being. But perfect stories rarely stay that way forever. Gradually, shadows began to creep into our lives. They were almost imperceptible at first, like a slight chill that seeps through an open window. Sex, an important part of any relationship, became a rarity, almost like a holiday you anticipate but don't always get. He was always less interested than I was, and over time, I stopped even trying. He felt guilty, and I felt the growing distance between us. Our work wasn't just demanding. It drained the life out of us. He struggled with difficult people and situations, which made him even more withdrawn. Over time, as if in an attempt to please everyone, he began to lose himself. He couldn't say no, even when it caused him pain. And, of course, he avoided conflicts like the plague. I, on the other hand, always rushed to resolve any issues immediately, never giving them a chance to grow into something bigger. Then, after months of this tension, came his confession. It was like a thunderclap, splitting the sky of our once secure life. He was in love with our assistant, the woman I had brought into our circle. Not just in love. He had slept with her 5 or 6 times over the past 3 weeks. His confession was like a lightning strike. How had this happened? How had our strong, almost unbreakable relationship turned into this? He told me it all started at his company's summer party, where, drunk, he let her get too close. From that moment, she became an obsession. His thoughts spiraled further. He started thinking about the children we didn't have. Her talk of wanting many children dug into his heart like thorns, making him realize things he hadn't considered before. In desperation, he even asked her if she wanted to have his child. She refused but didn't advise him to talk to me, his wife, the woman who had always been by his side. With each passing day, his obsession grew, and our communication turned into emptiness. He withdrew, wearing headphones during our usual hikes, avoiding the usual household tasks. And I, feeling our world collapsing, told him that he needed to figure out what he wanted from life. We decided to take a break, 3 weeks to think things through. These 3 weeks were supposed to be a time for reevaluation and reflection. But he used them to spend more time with her. He even bought condoms, though he later admitted he didn't use them. He sought comfort in her, a refuge, something new and exciting that seemed lost in our relationship. And then, the day before our scheduled meeting, he went to see her again. I asked him if there was someone else, and he lied to me, saying there wasn't. But by that point, I already knew the truth. I felt it deep in my heart. When he finally confessed everything, it felt like the world had collapsed. Everything we had built, all our memories, all our hopes for the future, everything crumbled in an instant. He agreed to go to therapy, but with each passing day, his doubts only grew. I love you in my own stupid way, he told me. But I felt like he had already made his decision. Now, at the age of 38, I'm faced with a choice. Do I let him go, allow him to leave for her, or do I fight for our past, for what I believe was real? The pain tears at my heart, But deep down, I believe that his infatuation with her is just a fleeting obsession, a cliché that could destroy everything unique we had. Am I a toxic girlfriend? It was almost 2 years ago when we first met. I was 21, fresh out of college, and still figuring out who I was and what I wanted from life. He was 22, confident, ambitious, and full of charm. We met at a mutual friend's birthday party, one of those casual gatherings where everyone seems to know everyone, except for that one intriguing stranger who catches your eye from across the room. That stranger, of course, was him. We clicked almost instantly. There was something about the way he spoke, the way he listened, that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We spent the whole evening talking, laughing, and discovering that we shared so many interests, from our love for late-night walks in the city to our obsession with obscure indie bands. By the end of the night, it felt like we had known each other forever. Over the next few months, our connection deepened. We started dating, and it wasn't long before we became inseparable. Our relationship grew naturally, with each day bringing us closer. We celebrated our first anniversary with a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin in the woods, where we spent our time hiking, cooking together, and simply enjoying each other's company. It was perfect. He was perfect. But, as with all relationships, things began to change as time went on. It wasn't a sudden shift, but rather a gradual evolution. The honeymoon phase started to fade, and reality set in. We began to face the typical challenges that any couple goes through: balancing our careers, maintaining our social lives, and finding time for each other amid the chaos of daily life. We argued occasionally, but nothing out of the ordinary. I believed that we could handle anything as long as we were together. Everything seemed to be going well until he started his internship. It was a significant opportunity for him, a stepping stone toward his dream career in marketing. The company was prestigious, and he was thrilled to have landed the position. I was proud of him, of course, but I couldn't shake this nagging feeling of unease. Maybe it was because I knew how competitive the industry was, or maybe it was because I was worried about how the long hours might affect our relationship. But I pushed those thoughts aside and supported him wholeheartedly. The internship was demanding, with long days and late nights, but he thrived in that environment. He would come home exhausted but exhilarated, eager to share stories about his day. I loved seeing him so passionate about his work, but I also missed the time we used to spend together. Our late-night walks became less frequent, and our conversations grew shorter, often interrupted by the buzz of his phone with work-related messages. One day, he mentioned that he had made a new friend at the internship, a woman named Emily. She was 24, just a year older than him, and a full-time employee at the company. She had been assigned as his mentor, guiding him through the complexities of the job. He spoke highly of her, praising her intelligence, her work ethic, and how helpful she had been in his professional growth. I didn't think much of it at the time after all. It was only natural for him to form connections with his colleagues. But as the weeks went by, I began to notice that he was mentioning Emily more and more. Every time we talked about his day, her name would come up, whether it was about a project they were working on together, a joke she had made, or how much she had taught him. It was clear that they had developed a close friendship, and while I didn't want to seem insecure or jealous, a small seed of doubt started to take root in my mind. His internship eventually came to an end, and I was relieved, thinking that things would go back to normal. I imagined us finally having more time for each other, reclaiming our late-night walks, and reconnecting after the hectic months. But even though the internship was over, his friendship with Emily continued. They stayed in touch, texting regularly. He assured me that their conversations were strictly professional. Nothing flirty, nothing to worry about. But the more I thought about it, the more uneasy I felt. Why did they need to keep in contact now that they were no longer colleagues? What was so important that they had to talk every day? I tried to dismiss these thoughts as irrational jealousy, but they kept gnawing at me, refusing to be ignored. One evening, after he had spent most of dinner texting her, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I told him how I felt, that I was uncomfortable with how much they were still talking, especially since they were no longer working together. I explained that I didn't see the need for them to continue their friendship now that the internship was over. To my surprise, he listened to me carefully and agreed to stop texting her. He promised that he would respect my feelings and cut off contact with her. For a moment, I felt a sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I knew I was asking a lot, but the fact that he was willing to make this sacrifice for me reassured me that our relationship was strong, that he cared about my feelings. But that sense of relief was short-lived. A few weeks later, I noticed that he was still in active conversation with her. It wasn't just a message here or there. They were texting regularly, just like before. My heart sank. I felt betrayed, hurt that he had broken his promise, and unsure of what this meant for us. When I confronted him about it, he apologized for not keeping his word. But he also made it clear that he didn't see a valid reason to stop texting her. He explained that their friendship was innocent, that there was no hidden agenda, and that he valued her as a friend. He didn't want to cut her off simply because I was uncomfortable, especially since there was no concrete reason for my discomfort. I was torn. On one hand, I understood where he was coming from. I knew that I was being unreasonable, that my request was based on insecurity rather than logic. But on the other hand, I couldn't help but feel hurt. He had promised me something, and then he had gone back on that promise. It made me question everything: his commitment to me, our relationship, and whether I was being too controlling or toxic. As I grappled with these conflicting emotions, I began to reflect on my past relationships. I realized that my current insecurities were deeply rooted in those past experiences. I had been cheated on before, in a similar situation, where what started as an innocent friendship turned into something more. That betrayal had left scars that I thought had healed, but now I was starting to see that they hadn't. I tried to rationalize my feelings, telling myself that this situation was different, that my boyfriend wasn't like the others. He had always been honest and trustworthy, and I knew that he cared about me deeply. But the fear of being hurt again was so overwhelming that it clouded my judgment. I found myself questioning every little thing, every text, every interaction, every laugh they shared. It was exhausting, and I hated that I was feeling this way. What made it even harder was that I wasn't normally the controlling type. I had never asked him to stop texting anyone before, and he had female friends that I had no issue with. But there was something about Emily that unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. It wasn't just about her being another woman. It was about the connection they had formed, the bond that had grown between them, and how it seemed to be infringing on what I considered to be our space. I knew I was being irrational, that my fears were based more on my past than on the present. But I couldn't help feeling the way I did. It felt like a losing battle, one where no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the insecurity and the hurt that this situation had caused. As the days went by, I started to notice changes in our relationship. They were subtle at first: a missed call, a short text message, an evening spent in silence instead of conversation. But they grew more noticeable over time. We weren't as connected as we used to be. The easy, flowing conversations we once had now felt forced, and the time we spent together felt strained, like we were both tiptoeing around something that neither of us wanted to address. I couldn't help but wonder if his friendship with Emily was more than just that. Was he developing feelings for her? Was she becoming more important to him than I was? These thoughts consumed me, and the more I tried to push them away, the stronger they became. I started to doubt myself. Was I being too paranoid? Was I letting my insecurities ruin our relationship? But then, a small voice inside me would whisper that something wasn't right, that my concerns were valid, that I wasn't imagining things. This back and forth tug of war in my mind left me emotionally drained and confused. One night, after weeks of internal struggle, I decided that I couldn't keep these feelings bottled up any longer. We were sitting on the couch, watching a movie, but I couldn't focus on the screen. My mind was racing, and I knew I had to say something. I paused the movie and turned to him, taking a deep breath. "We need to talk," I said, my voice trembling slightly. He looked at me, concern in his eyes, and I knew that he could sense that something was wrong. "I've been feeling really insecure lately," I began, choosing my words carefully. "And it's about your friendship with Emily. I know I've already brought this up before, but I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right." He didn't interrupt, letting me continue. "I know you've told me that there's nothing going on, and I want to believe that. But the fact that you're still in touch with her, after promising me that you would stop, it hurts. It makes me feel like my feelings don't matter, like you're prioritizing her over me." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling with how to respond. "I understand why you feel that way," he said finally. "And I'm sorry that I broke my promise. But you have to understand that I didn't mean to hurt you. I just don't see a reason to cut her off when our friendship is innocent." "I get that," I replied, my voice growing more frustrated. "But it's not just about the friendship itself. It's about the fact that you promised me something and then went back on it. It makes me feel like I can't trust you." "That's not fair," he said, his tone defensive. "I've never given you a reason to doubt me before. Just because I didn't keep one promise doesn't mean I'm untrustworthy. But how am I supposed to trust you if you're not willing to compromise?" I shot back. "If you can't even respect my feelings enough to let go of a friendship that's causing issues in our relationship?" We both fell silent, the tension in the room thick and suffocating. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the struggle between wanting to make me happy and holding on to something he believed was harmless. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about Emily. It was about something deeper, about our relationship, our boundaries, and how we navigated the challenges that came our way. That night, after our heated discussion, I lay in bed wide awake, replaying the conversation in my mind. I felt torn, caught between my love for him and the fear that our relationship was slowly unraveling. I didn't want to lose him, but I also didn't want to ignore my own feelings and let them fester into resentment. The next day, I decided to take some time for myself to think things through. I went for a long walk, trying to clear my head and gain some perspective. As I walked through the park, I reflected on everything that had happened, the initial excitement of our relationship, the changes that had come with time, and the recent challenges we were facing. I realized that I needed to be honest with myself about where my feelings were coming from. My insecurity wasn't just about Emily, it was about the unresolved issues from my past that I had never fully dealt with. I had been carrying the baggage of those past betrayals into my current relationship, and it was unfair to both of us. But I also recognized that my feelings weren't completely unfounded. Trust was a two-way street, and while I needed to work on my insecurities, he also needed to understand that his actions had consequences. Breaking his promise, even if he believed it was for a good reason, had hurt me deeply, and that pain needed to be acknowledged. When I returned home, I was determined to approach the situation differently. I knew that if we were going to move forward, we needed to have an open and honest conversation, one where we both felt heard and respected. That evening, I sat down with him again, but this time I approached the conversation with a calmer, more introspective mindset. "I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about," I began, "and I want to apologize if I've been too harsh or demanding. I know that my insecurities are playing a big role in how I've been feeling, and that's something I need to work on." He looked at me, surprised by my change in tone, and nodded. "I appreciate you saying that," he replied softly. "I never wanted to make you feel insecure or hurt." "I know," I said, taking a deep breath. "But at the same time, I need you to understand that your actions do affect me. When you broke your promise, it made me feel like my feelings weren't important. I don't want to control who you can or can't be friends with, but I also need to feel like I can trust you to keep your word." He reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "You're right," he admitted. "I didn't think about how much breaking that promise would hurt you, and I'm sorry. I don't want you to feel like you're competing with someone else for my attention." We sat in silence for a moment, holding hands, both of us processing the weight of the conversation. "So, where do we go from here?" I asked finally. "I think we need to find a middle ground," he suggested. "I won't cut off my friendship with Emily entirely, but I'll be more mindful of how much we're in contact. And I'll make sure to prioritize our relationship first. If you ever feel uncomfortable again, just tell me, and we'll figure it out together." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a step in the right direction. We were both willing to compromise, to listen to each other, and to work on the issues that had been causing so much tension between us. As time went on, things began to improve between us. We started to communicate more openly, sharing our thoughts and feelings without fear of judgment. I made a conscious effort to work on my insecurities, reminding myself that our relationship was built on trust and that I had no reason to doubt his commitment to me. He, in turn, was more attentive to my feelings, making sure that I felt valued and loved. He reduced the frequency of his conversations with Emily, and when they did talk, he was transparent about it, letting me know what they discussed and why. It wasn't always easy, and there were still moments when those old insecurities would creep back in. But we faced them together, supporting each other and growing stronger as a couple. I learned that it was okay to have doubts and fears, as long as we addressed them head-on and didn't let them fester. Our relationship wasn't perfect, no relationship ever is. But we were committed to making it work, to navigating the challenges that came our way, and to loving each other despite our flaws and insecurities. In the end, I realized that love is about more than just the initial spark or the honeymoon phase. It's about the everyday moments, the compromises, the trust, and the willingness to grow together. It's about facing your fears and insecurities, not alone, but with someone who's willing to hold your hand through it all. And as we continued to build our future together, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together, with honesty, understanding, and love.
My neighbor died, and I blame myself for his death. It was just a regular afternoon. I had just returned from the grocery store, my son waiting for me outside to help unload the bags. We were doing what we always did, chatting about mundane things and preparing to go inside when suddenly we heard it. A scream that stopped us both in our tracks. I'm not talking about a casual shout or a child's cry. This was primal, a sound so raw, so filled with terror and pain that it sent chills down my spine. It sounded like an adult woman, and the terror in her voice was unmistakable. It was the kind of scream you never want to hear in your life. The kind that makes you realize something awful is happening right now, and you're not ready to face it. We started scanning the neighborhood, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The sound was so piercing, so desperate, that it seemed to echo off the walls of every house nearby. Then, we saw it. The house across the street and one over. We'd never met them before. They were just another family in a row of families you nod to occasionally, maybe wave at when you're both putting out the trash. The scream stopped for a moment, and then, a second later, started again. This time it was even worse, more guttural, more frantic. My son and I exchanged a look. We knew something was horribly wrong. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest as we watched the garage door of that house start to open. Just a crack, and then close again. It opened and closed a few more times, each time as if someone inside was trying to escape. I could feel the panic rising inside me. What were we supposed to do? We didn't know these people. But the screams, the terror. Someone needed help. A neighbor from the house next door was outside now, too. He looked as confused and worried as we did. The three of us, strangers brought together by this horrifying situation, cautiously approached the driveway. None of us spoke at first, just glancing at each other, sharing the same silent fear. We all knew something was seriously wrong, but we didn't know what to do. The screaming continued, and the garage door opened and closed again. We had no choice but to call the police. As soon as we agreed, I pulled out my phone to dial 911, but just as I started to explain what was happening, the garage door finally opened all the way. A woman ran out, wild-eyed, her face pale and tear-streaked. Her hair was a mess, clothes disheveled. She was gasping for breath, screaming something incomprehensible at first. Then, through her sobs, we understood. "My son is dead," she wailed. "I found him. He's dead. I haven't seen him all day, and he's dead." She was pacing, her hands shaking, her breath ragged. It was the kind of panic that consumes a person. She was lost in her own grief, in the horror of what she had just discovered. Without thinking, I rushed to her and grabbed her by the shoulders. She was so close to collapsing from the sheer weight of it all. I had to make her focus. "How old is he?" I asked, my voice trembling. 26, she managed to choke out before breaking down again. I froze. 26. This wasn't a child. This wasn't someone I could try to save with CPR. This was a grown man, her son, and she had found him dead, just now, in his room. I felt an overwhelming sense of helplessness. I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't ready to walk into that house and face what she had just seen. I couldn't. All I could do was hold her, trying to keep her from crumbling. I grabbed my phone again, called 911, and explained the situation in a shaky voice. As I waited for help to arrive, I rocked her back and forth, trying to calm her, though I knew my words were probably just background noise to her agony. She was hyperventilating, barely able to stay on her feet. I had to take her face in my hands a few times to get her to look at me, to keep her from spiraling into unconsciousness. I didn't know what else to do. My son was standing just 10 feet away, his eyes wide, trying to process everything. I couldn't even think about him in that moment. I just had to keep her from collapsing completely. The paramedics arrived within minutes, though it felt like hours. I explained everything to them as best as I could, still holding on to the woman as if my touch alone could keep her from breaking. They nodded, calm, professional, and went inside the house. They were so composed, so used to this kind of tragedy. It was routine for them. For us, for her, it was the worst day of her life. When they came back out, one of the paramedics walked over to the police and told them, softly, that the son had been dead for some time. There was nothing they could do. I felt the woman in my arms stiffen, and then the screams started all over again. This time, they were worse, louder, more guttural, more animalistic. The kind of scream you can't forget. Paramedics mentioned something to the officers about a fentanyl patch on his arm. I heard it clearly, and my heart sank even deeper. I'm a recovering opiate addict. I'd been clean for years, but hearing that word fentanyl hit me like a punch to the gut. It brought back memories of how close I had come so many times to losing everything. And now, this young man, this stranger, was gone because of it. As the reality of the situation settled over me, I started to remember all the times I had been annoyed by that neighbor kid. The late-night basketball games, the thumping bass from his car when he and his friends hung out outside. And now he was dead, and his mother was in my arms, her world shattered. Paramedics were all men, and they were doing their jobs, but I knew they wouldn't hold her the way I was holding her. They wouldn't offer her the kind of comfort she needed in that moment. I stayed with her, even though I didn't know her, even though this wasn't my tragedy. I couldn't leave her until someone she knew arrived. Her breathing was still labored, and the paramedics eventually laid her down in the ambulance and sedated her. As they drove away, I stood there, numb, filled with adrenaline and grief. I've always felt things deeply, and this was no different. In moments like this, it's hard to separate yourself from the pain of others. It felt like I had been pulled into her world, into her suffering. I walked back to the end of the driveway where my son was waiting for me. His face was pale, his eyes full of a heaviness that didn't belong to someone his age. He turned to me and said, "All those times I told you I wanted to die. I'll never do that to you." I didn't know what to say. I just nodded and thanked him, though my mind was racing, trying to process everything that had just happened. We walked home in silence. For years, I had worried about my own son, terrified of what I might find behind his door. He had told me so many times how he didn't feel attached to this life, how he was too decent, too sensitive for this world. And I had lived in constant fear, never knowing what the next day would bring. Putting away the groceries felt wrong after what we had just witnessed. Felt like we were betraying the gravity of what had just happened. But we didn't know what else to do. The ambulance was still outside, and the stunned silence hung over our house for the rest of the evening. Following days were a blur. I saw the cars parked down the street for the funeral service, and I thought about leaving a card in their mailbox. But I didn't. Our houses were far enough apart that we never ran into each other, and they moved away a few months later. That was 5 years ago. My son is still here, keeping his promise. But that day, that scream, that moment, it changed everything. I'll never forget it.
My kids knew about my wife's affair and helped her cover it up. Last week, everything in my life shattered in a moment. After 29 years of marriage, I found out that the woman I thought I knew better than anyone had been deceiving me. But that wasn't even the worst part. The part that broke me to my core was that my daughters, my own flesh and blood, were helping her cover it up. It started on an ordinary afternoon. My wife, Linda, was in the shower, and I was sitting on the couch, absent-mindedly scrolling through my phone. A notification lit up on her phone beside me. I didn't think much of it. With our 2 daughters, Maddie and Alice, living nearby, Linda was often in touch with them. I assumed it was one of them confirming their plans for dinner that evening, something they'd been doing regularly for a few months. It was a simple tradition, just the 3 of them going out for a girls' night. No big deal. But then I saw it. A text from an unsaved number popped up on the screen. "I can't wait to see you tonight." My stomach dropped. The lighthearted message didn't seem like something you'd send to a casual friend or one of our daughters. My hands started to tremble as I opened the conversation. It was brief, mostly plans confirming dinner for that night, and then a few lines about how they missed each other and how once a week wasn't enough. The language was intimate. Too intimate. My head spun as I realized what I was seeing. My wife, the woman I had spent nearly 3 decades with, was having an affair. It was as if the ground beneath me gave way, and I was falling, spiraling into disbelief and confusion. But my initial shock quickly gave way to anger. Anger that this was happening. She had betrayed me. And even more, I wanted to catch her in the lie. I needed to know for sure. I grabbed my phone and quickly sent a text to both Maddie and Alice, asking them about their girls' dinner. If Linda had lied to me, then maybe my daughters were part of this lie. It was a ridiculous thought. Why would they lie? They wouldn't. They couldn't. I convinced myself that this was just a misunderstanding. Moments later, my phone buzzed with responses from both Maddie and Alice, excitedly confirming the dinner and saying how much they were looking forward to it. My heart stopped. They were lying too. Why? How could they? It felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Everything I thought I knew about my family, my daughters, my wife, was unraveling. I sat there, paralyzed, unsure of what to do next. I wasn't proud of what I did after. I turned on the location sharing feature on Linda's phone without her knowing. I wasn't thinking straight. I was fueled by a mixture of rage, hurt, and disbelief. I watched as her little location dot moved across the city, heading toward a restaurant downtown. Still holding on to the hope that I was wrong, that maybe Maddie and Alice were at the restaurant waiting for her, I got into my car and followed her. When I arrived at the restaurant, I felt sick. There she was, sitting at a table near the window, laughing and talking, but not with our daughters. She was with him, her boss, a man I knew from her work functions, someone who I had never imagined would be part of this nightmare. They were holding hands across the table, leaning in close, sharing what looked like an intimate moment. I stood there for a minute, rooted in place, watching the woman I had loved for 29 years betray me in front of my own eyes. I wanted to storm in there, to scream at them, to demand an explanation. But I didn't. Instead, I took out my phone, snapped a few photos of them, and opened the family group chat. My hands shook as I typed the message. "Glad you're enjoying girls' dinner together." I hit send and turned off my phone. I couldn't bear to deal with the fallout right then. I drove to my brother's house, where I collapsed on his couch, unable to speak. I spent the night tossing and turning, my mind racing with a million thoughts. How long had this been going on? Why hadn't I noticed? How could she do this? How could they do this? The next morning, I woke up to dozens of missed calls and messages. My phone buzzed with over 40 texts and 20 voicemails. My wife's texts followed a predictable pattern, the cheater's playbook of excuses. She apologized profusely, begged for my forgiveness, and swore it was just a mistake. She even tried blaming me in a few of the messages, as if my lack of attention had driven her to this. But I didn't care to hear her excuses. Pictures of her with him were all the proof I needed. I was ready to text her back with a single sentence. "I'll be getting a divorce. I suggest you find a lawyer." But my brother stopped me. He's always been the more level-headed one. He told me to take my time, meet with lawyers first, make sure I had the upper hand before making any rash decisions. So I spent the day visiting the top divorce attorneys in town, making sure she couldn't use them against me. By the time I finished, I was emotionally drained, but felt slightly more in control. That was until I checked the messages from my daughters. Both of them had sent long apologetic texts. Maddie, my younger daughter, was frantic. She had sent me almost 50 messages in a panic, saying how much she regretted lying to me, how she hated keeping the secret, how she had been torn between her mother and me. Her boyfriend even texted, begging me to reach out to her because she was on the verge of a breakdown. Maddie, I love you, but you need to understand that what you've done has hurt me deeply. I need space, I replied. She responded almost instantly. Okay, I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll never forgive myself. I love you. But I couldn't bring myself to reply. Alice was different. She was always closer to her mom. Her message wasn't as panicked as Maddie's. She said she was sorry, but then had the nerve to tell me not to throw away a good marriage over one mistake. One mistake? I couldn't believe what I was reading. My entire life had been turned upside down, and she thought it was just a mistake? Alice, this isn't a mistake. This is a betrayal from my entire family. Please don't contact me until I reach out first, I replied, my anger boiling over. She never responded, but later that day, I got another text from Linda. She had seen my message to Alice and started pleading with me not to take my anger out on her, but I couldn't care less about what she thought. As far as I was concerned, the only communication we would have moving forward would be through lawyers. It's been 5 days now, and I'm still staying at my brother's place. Every morning I wake up feeling like I've been hit by a truck. Cry more than I ever have in my life. The sadness is so overwhelming at times it feels like I can't breathe. But then, just as quickly, the anger takes over, and I feel like I could tear the world apart with my bare hands. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how I'll ever be able to look at my daughters again, let alone my wife. Betrayal runs so deep. Alice is supposed to get married this fall, and I've paid for almost everything, but now I'm not even sure I'll attend. How can I stand there watching her, knowing that she sided with her mother, helped her lie to me? I'm destroyed, completely and utterly destroyed, and I don't know how to pick up the pieces. The days following my discovery turned into a blur. I stayed at my brother's house, avoiding the outside world as much as I could. Every time my phone buzzed, it felt like a reminder that my life was unraveling, and I had no control over it. On the 6th day, the silence at my brother's place started to gnaw at me. He had work, a family of his own to take care of, and as much as he tried to support me, I knew I couldn't stay there forever. So, I did what felt inevitable. I drove back home. The entire drive, I felt like I was heading toward a battlefield. The place that had once been my refuge, my home, now felt tainted, like an enemy stronghold. My heart pounded as I pulled into the driveway. I could see Linda's car parked there, which meant she was inside. I didn't want to talk to her. Didn't want to confront her emotions again. I just wanted to collect some things and go back to my brother's, maybe even check into a hotel. Anything to avoid the confrontation that was surely coming. I unlocked the door quietly, hoping to slip in unnoticed. The house felt eerily still. Too still. For a moment, I wondered if she had left. Maybe she'd run off to stay with her boss, with the man who had stolen everything from me. But then, I heard the faint sound of crying. I froze in place. The sound was coming from the living room. Slowly, I walked toward the door, already bracing myself for whatever would come next. I wasn't sure I had the emotional strength to deal with this, not after everything that had happened. But it wasn't Linda. It was Maddie. She was curled up on the couch, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. When she heard my footsteps, she looked up, her tear-streaked face a mix of relief and guilt. "Dad," she croaked, her voice breaking. The word family hung in the air like a cruel joke. What family? The one that had conspired behind my back? The one that was built on lies and betrayal? I sat down across from her, rubbing my temples as the weight of everything pressed down on me. "Maddie, I don't know how we're supposed to move forward from this. I don't know how I'm supposed to trust anyone again, not after this." She leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "Dad, please, I love you. I love you so much. I was stupid. I thought I was protecting you, or maybe protecting Mom. I don't even know anymore. But I swear, I hated every second of it. I never wanted to lie to you. I didn't know what to do." Her words, as heartfelt as they were, didn't fix anything. They didn't erase the pain. But looking at her, so broken and guilt-ridden, I couldn't help but soften, even just a little. She was my daughter. She had made a terrible mistake, but she was still my daughter. I need time, Maddie, I said, a voice quieter now. I don't know if I can forgive this, at least not right away. You have to understand that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face again. I understand, Dad. I do. Please, don't shut me out. I don't know what I'd do if I lost you. I stood up, feeling the walls of the house closing in on me. I need some space, I muttered, heading for the door. Couldn't be in that house any longer. The memories, the lies, it was all too much. Maddie didn't try to stop me, but as I turned to leave, she called out, Dad, I'm sorry. I love you. I didn't reply. Couldn't. I just walked out the door and into the fading daylight. That night, I booked a hotel room. I needed distance, needed to clear my head. The time away from the house gave me space to think, process everything. But the anger and hurt didn't fade. If anything, it intensified. I spent hours lying in the dark, replaying everything over and over in my mind. The next morning, I received a text from Alice. It was brief, cold, almost businesslike. We need to talk, Dad. I stared at the message for a long time, my thumb hovering over the screen. Talking to Alice was the last thing I wanted to do. Unlike Maddie, who had shown some level of remorse, Alice had sided with her mother from the beginning. Her loyalty to Linda, even in the face of betrayal, cut me deeply. I didn't know if I could handle another confrontation. But something about the tone of her message made me pause. It wasn't an apology, it wasn't even an explanation. It was just a demand. We need to talk. As if she had something important to say, something I needed to hear. Reluctantly, I agreed to meet her. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop, a neutral place where emotions wouldn't be as likely to spiral out of control. I wasn't sure I could face her in the house again. That place had become a minefield of broken trust. When I arrived, Alice was already seated at a corner table, her arms crossed and her face unreadable. She had always been the more composed of my two daughters, the one who kept her emotions in check. But today, there was a tension in her posture that I hadn't seen before. I sat down across from her, the silence between us heavy. I'm glad you came, she said, her voice steady but distant. I almost didn't, I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. You didn't flinch. I know you're angry, Dad. And I get it, I do. But there's something you need to understand. I waited, unsure of what she was about to say. I know you think I've been siding with Mom through all of this, she began, her gaze hardening. But it's not that simple. This whole situation, it's more complicated than you realize. Complicated? I scoffed. Alice, your mother had an affair. You both lied to me. What's complicated about that? She took a deep breath, as if steadying herself for what was coming next. It wasn't just about the affair, Dad. There were things going on that you didn't see. Things that have been building up for a long time. Her words caught me off guard. What was she talking about? Alice leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Mom's been unhappy for years. She didn't want to say anything because she didn't want to hurt you, but things haven't been right between you two for a long time. You just didn't notice. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Please subscribe to the channel.
We accidentally beat up a man. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, especially here. But life has a way of throwing you into the strangest situations. You can think everything is under control, that you've got it handled. But in a blink, your world can spiral into chaos. It all started on July 5th, 2022. That date will be forever etched into my mind. My grandmother died that morning. My father, mother, and grandfather were all running dangerously high fevers. 103, 102, 101 respectively. And me? I was sitting at 101 myself, but somehow I was the healthiest person in the family, which meant I had to hold everything together. Alone. I was the one who had to admit my grandfather into the hospital and handle my grandmother's last rites. It was surreal, handling everything in a fog of fever, grief, and confusion. By evening, I was physically and emotionally exhausted, drained from a day I wasn't prepared to handle. I called Samai, my best friend, someone who had always been there for me. He was out in Noida but said he'd be home in an hour. When he finally arrived around 8 p.m., he brought whiskey with him, knowing I'd need something to help me unwind. We sat down to talk, and I spilled everything. The deaths, the hospital, my fear of losing everyone. I didn't know how to stop it, and through it all, I was running a fever that had me seeing stars. That's when Same, in his own Same way, brought up the evil eye. He said maybe all of this was happening because of something we'd crossed. Maybe my family had been cursed. At first, I thought it was just the alcohol talking. But then I remembered that my parents had crossed paths with an Agori Baba a few days earlier while they were out exploring some new part of the city. Something clicked. I wasn't sure if I believed in curses, but with everything going wrong, I was willing to consider anything. Same and I made a snap decision. We would go find this Agori and get some answers. It seemed crazy, so did everything else. We packed bags that night. I was ready for a 5-day trip, fever and all. The next morning, July 6th, Samai pulled up in his car, an MG Hector. We hit the road, heading toward the area where my parents had encountered the Agori. I remember thinking that the day had already started weird, but it only got stranger from there. Within the first few hours, we saw no less than 5 truck accidents. At one point, we narrowly avoided our own accident by barely a centimeter. Dead animals littered the roadside, cows, dogs, cats. Something was wrong. It felt like the universe was sending us a sign. We pressed on. After 3 hours on the road, we both felt uneasy. Samai was looking pale, and when we checked, his fever had spiked to 100. Now we were both sick. We decided to stop for the night and booked a hotel. It was one of those generic roadside places, but it had a bar, and that was all we needed. We got some rest, and by evening, we were ready to face whatever came next. Beer cans in hand, we set out on the next leg of the trip. Samai didn't want to drive anymore, so I took over. The highway was quiet, and I was speeding, trying to shake the unsettling feeling in my gut. An hour in, we saw another accident. This time there was a forest nearby, but the driver was nowhere to be found. Just an eerie, burning oil lamp sitting by the wreckage. We looked around but found nothing. There was something off about the whole scene, so we didn't linger long. We drove the rest of the way to our destination in silence, booking another hotel when we arrived. I felt like we were being watched, but I chalked it up to exhaustion and fever. The evening of July 7th, we finally started looking for the Agori. We asked around, but no one seemed to know who or where he was. The locals shrugged us off. Tourists ignored us. We spent hours searching, but by nightfall, we still hadn't found anything. Defeated, we headed back to the hotel to drink and recover. That night, after another round of whiskey and dinner, Samai suggested we go looking for the Agori one last time. We weren't going to give up that easily. It was nearly midnight when we left the hotel, wandering through narrow streets and back alleys, trying to find any sign of this man who might hold the key to our suffering. Finally, we saw it. A dim, flickering light in the distance. As we approached, we realized it was the same burning oil lamp we'd seen earlier by the truck accident. This time, though, it was next to a small fire, and sitting by that fire was the Agori Baba. I don't know what I expected, maybe some kind of supernatural moment or deep wisdom. But when we confronted him, he was ordinary. Just a man. We explained everything to him, but he just smirked and muttered something about a sharp. Whatever that meant. Samai lost it, he snapped. Maybe it was the fever, maybe the fear, or maybe it was just everything we'd been through. He lunged at the Agori and started hitting him. It was brutal. After a few punches and slaps, the Agori was begging for mercy, claiming he didn't know any mantras, he was just a fraud. Samai dragged him to a nearby sewer and shoved him in, the man stumbling off into the darkness, soaked and humiliated. We left the scene in silence, not sure what we had just done or what it meant. The next morning, July 8th, everything changed. My dad called to tell me that everyone in the family was fine. Their fevers had broken, and they were being discharged from the hospital. Relief flooded through me. We packed up our things and headed back home, the tension in the air lifting as we drove. We celebrated the good news with energy drinks, but there was still a lingering sense of unease. Had we really lifted some kind of curse, or had it all just been a series of coincidences? When we got home, I explained everything to my family. They were shocked, not just by what had happened, but by how far I'd gone to try and fix things. Samai became almost like family after that, always hanging around the house, drinking beers with my dad and me, like we were all part of some strange brotherhood. But the Agori? He disappeared. We never saw him again. We did get a few anonymous death threats afterward, but Samaya and I weren't scared. We felt like we had faced something dark and come out the other side stronger. Looking back, I'm not sure if what we did was right or if any of it was even real. But it happened. Part of my story now. One thing's for sure. Life will never be the same after that fevered journey. I saw my mother doing this with her lover, and now I'm afraid to tell my father. This happened to me when I was 14 years old. I don't even know where to start, but here I go. You probably never think that such moments will happen to you. You hear about them. You may have even read some horror stories on Reddit, but when it comes to your life, it's a whole different story. It seems unreal, as if you are watching a scene from a movie that you can't pause or rewind. This is how I felt on the day my world fell apart. It all started like any other ordinary day. I'm a college student, nothing special. I have classes, assignments, and the usual stress that comes with juggling studies and life. But a few days ago, I woke up and just couldn't do it. You know, there are days when you feel out of sorts, as if you're too worn out to function properly. Yes, it was me. I decided to take a day off, skip a class, catch my breath, and maybe even take a little nap. Nothing special, right? So I got ready, went to campus as usual, but as soon as I got there, I couldn't bring myself to sit through the lecture. I mean, the thought of just going through the motions felt unbearable. Instead of going to class, I just sat outside, scrolling through my phone and thinking about nothing in particular. I had AirPods in my ears, the music was blasting, drowning out everything around me. I decided to go back home. Maybe you could tell Mom that I wasn't feeling well and just need to rest. That was the plan. Just harmless. The bus ride back went without incident. I was looking out the window, watching as the streets and houses blurred, lost in my thoughts. I didn't tell my mom that I was coming home. I thought it wasn't necessary. Why not? I mean, I live there, right? What needed to be prepared? When the bus dropped me off, I started walking home with my AirPods in, and the music turned up loud. The sun was shining, the breeze was pleasant, everything seemed normal. Until it changed. Our house is arranged in such a way that when you enter through the front door, you immediately see the living room. It's an open layout, so it's impossible to hide what's happening in this space. I have walked through this door 1,000 times, never thinking about it. But this time, everything was different. This time I saw something that I will never be able to forget. When I opened the door slowly as always, I glanced at the sofa. And here she is, my mom. But she was not alone. She was with someone else, doing what no child should ever see their parent doing. I won't go into details because, be honest, I don't want to relive it any more than I already have to. Let's say it etched itself into my memory in such a way that it will haunt me forever. I just saw everything. I saw how he does that with my mother. At the moment I saw them, I froze. Time has stopped. I didn't know what to do, what to say. My brain couldn't keep up with processing this. Before my mom could react, I turned around, walked out, and closed the door behind me. I sat on the front steps, my heart was racing, and my thoughts were in turmoil. I felt unwell, as if I had knots in my stomach, and my hands were trembling. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. After a few minutes, the door creaked, and my mom stepped outside. She looked panicked. Her face was pale, and her hands were trembling. At first, she didn't say anything. And to be honest, I didn't want her to say anything. I didn't want to hear any explanation she was about to give me, because I knew that whatever she said wouldn't change what I had seen. It wouldn't erase the image that is now etched in my memory. Finally, she spoke. She told me that the guy, whoever he was, left through the back door, as if that changed anything for the better. Then she began to explain, plead, ask. She said it was a mistake, that it wouldn't happen again, and that I can't tell Dad about it. She said it would destroy everything, ruin our family. She was in despair, but I couldn't even look at her. I didn't know what to say, how to react. My own mother, to whom I had trusted my entire life, asked me to keep her secret, to lie to my dad who wasn't even in the state, who had no idea at all about what was happening. I sat there, silently, while she kept talking, her words blending into an indistinct noise in my ears. My mind was spinning. How could I have kept this to myself? How will I be able to look my father in the eyes again, knowing what I know? How can I even look at her the same way? It wasn't just some minor secret. It changed lives. I'm stuck in the middle of this. After what felt like forever, my mom finally stopped talking. She asked again if I'd keep quiet, if I'd protect her from the fallout. I just nodded. What else could I do? I didn't want to be the one to destroy my family, but at the same time, I didn't want to live with this burden. I felt trapped, suffocated by the weight of it all. The rest of the day was a blur. I locked myself in my room, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But no matter how hard I tried, couldn't wrap my head around it. Couldn't stop replaying the scene in my mind. I felt sick to my core, like everything I thought I knew about my family had been ripped apart in an instant. That night, my mom acted like everything was normal. She made dinner, asked how my day was. Like we hadn't just had the most messed up conversation of my life. I barely spoke, barely ate. I didn't know how to be around her anymore. Every time I looked at her, all I saw was betrayal. Days passed, and I still hadn't told my dad. He was still on his business trip, calling to check in like he always does. I couldn't bring myself to say anything. How could I? How do you tell your dad that his wife, the person he's trusted for decades, is cheating on him? I didn't want to break his heart, but at the same time, I didn't know how to live with the truth. Every phone call felt like a lie. Every word I said felt like I was betraying him just as much as she had. I've been carrying this secret for a while now, and it's eating me alive. I can't sleep. I can't focus on school. I feel like I'm drowning in guilt, anger, confusion, and sadness all at once. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I should tell my dad or keep pretending like nothing happened. Either way, someone gets hurt. Either way, my family will never be the same again. And that's the part that scares me the most. So here I am, spilling my guts to strangers on the internet because I don't know where else to turn. Maybe someone out there has been through something similar. Maybe someone can tell me what the hell I'm supposed to do. All I know is that nothing will ever be the same. My life changed the moment I walked through that door, and I'm not sure I'll ever be able to go back, how things were before.
My parents always loved my brother more than me. I was always second. I was always the shadow in my family, the one overlooked, while my younger brother basked in the light. From the time we were kids, it was clear who the favorite was. My parents never even tried to hide it. My brother, just 10 months younger than me, was treated like a golden child. And I, despite my best efforts, always I second best. It didn't matter that I was the one who excelled in school, who worked tirelessly to maintain perfect grades. It was Jared, my brother, who got all the praise, all the love. We were close in age, so my parents enrolled us in school together. This meant that Jared and I were always in the same grade, competing directly with each other. But despite this, I always came out on top, whether it was academics, sports, or anything else. I was better than him at everything, but it never seemed to matter. Jared was the one my parents fawned over. Maybe it was because he was the more social one, always talking about his dreams of becoming a renowned microbiologist, while I was more introverted, focused on my goal of attending Caltech to study data science. My parents' favoritism became more apparent as we grew older. Around my junior year of high school, I had a feeling I might get into Caltech. I worked hard for it, not just because it was my dream, but because I wanted to prove to my parents that I was worth their attention too. So I sat down with them, had what I thought was a fair conversation, and they assured me they would cover my college fees. It wouldn't be difficult for them. After all, my father ran a successful business, and money wasn't an issue. They had been endowed with wealth from the start, and it seemed like an easy promise for them to keep. But as the time for college applications approached, I started to feel uneasy. My parents had always promised to take care of my college expenses, but they were also the same people who had always favored Jared. Despite my doubts, I continued to believe them. I didn't apply for jobs or internships to save up for college, trusting that they would keep their word. The day my acceptance letter from Caltech arrived, I was ecstatic. I had worked so hard for this moment, and it was finally here. But my joy was short-lived. When I told my parents the news, expecting them to share in my excitement, they did a complete 180. They told me they wouldn't be paying for my college after all. Not because they couldn't afford it, but because Jared hadn't gotten into his dream school, Cornell. They wanted me to attend a mediocre college with him, so he wouldn't feel bad about himself. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They wanted me to give up my dream, the dream I had worked so hard for, just to protect Jared's feelings. I refused, of course. There was no way I was going to let my parents' favoritism ruin my future. But they were adamant. If I didn't agree to their terms, they wouldn't pay for my college education at all. I felt betrayed. They had been promising me for years that they would support me, only to turn their backs on me when it mattered most. I had always known they favored Jared. But this was a new low. I couldn't stay in that house any longer, knowing that my parents didn't care about my future. So I packed my bags and left. I went to my uncle's house, the one family member who had always been on my side. I told him everything, how my parents had lied to me, how they were trying to force me into a school I didn't want to go to just to spare Jared's feelings. He was furious. He didn't show it. Instead, he told me he would take care of everything. He promised to pay for my college tuition, no strings attached. I was overwhelmed with gratitude. My uncle was a dentist and he made a good living, but paying for my tuition was still a significant financial burden. Yet he didn't hesitate. He wanted to make sure I had the future I deserved, even if my parents didn't. I've been in college for a year now, and I haven't spoken to my parents since I left. They haven't tried to contact me either, and I guess that's for the best. I don't want anything to do with them after what they did to me. I've been focusing on my studies, doing everything I can to succeed and prove to myself that I don't need them. But last week, out of the blue, my parents showed up at my college. I was shocked. They hadn't spoken to me in a year, and now they were here, trying to make amends. They apologized for everything, saying they wanted to make things right. I was suspicious, of course. Why now? Why after all this time? As it turns out, they weren't here just to apologize. They had an ulterior motive. They told me they were in talks with a big investor for their catering business, and they needed my help. Apparently, this investor's son was trying to get into Caltech, and my parents had bragged about me getting accepted. Now, the investor wanted me to meet his son and give him some advice. My parents were desperate. They needed this deal, and they were willing to do anything to get it, even if it meant swallowing their pride and coming to me for help. They offered to pay double my remaining college expenses if I would just go to this party and say nice things about them to the investor. It was tempting. The money would have been helpful. All I had to do was lie and say that my parents were supportive and loving, that they had always had my back. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand there and pretend that everything was fine, that they hadn't betrayed me. So I agreed to go to the party, but I had a different plan in mind. When we got there, my parents introduced me to the investor, and I decided to tell him the truth. I told him how my parents had cut me off because I refused to sacrifice my future for my brother's sake. I told him how they had promised to pay for my college for years, only to turn their backs on me when it mattered most. The investor was shocked, as were the other guests. My parents were mortified, and they tried to downplay what I was saying, but it was too late. The damage was done. I had exposed them for what they really were, and there was no going back. After that, I left the party and went back to my dorm. My parents have been trying to contact me ever since, but I've been ignoring them. They're angry, of course. They're blaming me for ruining their deal. But I don't care. They deserved it for what they did to me. But not everyone saw it that way. When I told my uncle what I had done, I expected him to laugh, to be proud of me for standing up to my parents. But he wasn't. He said I had gone too far, that I should have just told them I didn't want to help and left it at that. He was disappointed in me, and that hurt more than anything my parents had ever done. I tried to explain to him why I did it, how hurt I had been, how I needed to show my parents that they couldn't treat me like that. But he didn't understand. He said that revenge wasn't the way to go, that it wouldn't make me feel better in the long run. I knew he was right, but I couldn't help the way I felt. I was angry, and and I wanted my parents to feel the pain they had caused me. Eventually, we made up. My uncle said he still supported me, even if he didn't agree with what I had done. He told me that he would always be there for me, no matter what, and that meant a lot. But I could tell that something had changed between us. There was a distance now, and I wasn't sure if things would ever be the same. A few days later, my parents showed up at my college again. This time, they brought Jared with them. I hadn't seen him in a year, and I was surprised at how much he had changed. He had clearly been working out, and he looked a lot bigger, more intimidating. Couldn't help but wonder if they had brought him along to try and scare me into doing what they wanted. They took me to a diner near campus, and once again, they tried to convince me to retract what I had said at the party. They told me that the investor had stopped returning their calls and that their business was in jeopardy because of me. They even tried to bribe me again, offering me more money if I would just post an apology on social media. I refused. I wasn't going to lie for them, no matter how much they offered. That's when my father lost his temper. He slammed his fist on the table, demanding that I do what they asked. I stood my ground, telling them that I didn't owe them anything. They had given up their right to tell me what to do when they abandoned me. My mother tried to play the guilt card, saying they had raised me, and this was how I repaid them. But I wasn't having any of it. I reminded them that they had always favored Jared. They had never treated me like they did him. They had always put his needs above mine, and I was done letting them control my life. After that, I walked out. I told them that if they ever tried to contact me again, I would file a restraining order. I wasn't going to let them bully me anymore. They had made their choice, and now they had to live with it. As I walked back to my dorm, I felt a sense of relief. I had finally stood up to my parents and told them how I felt. It wasn't easy, and I knew there would be consequences, but I didn't care. I was done being their pawn. Since then, my parents haven't tried to contact me again. My uncle and I are still close, though things are a bit strained between us. I know he doesn't approve of how I handled things, but he still supports me, and that's what matters. As for Jared, I have no idea what he's up to. I don't care either. I'm focused on my future, and I'm not going to let my family hold me back. I'm going to graduate from Caltech, get a job, and build a life for myself, without them. It's not easy being on my own, but I'm stronger for it. I've learned that I can't rely on anyone but myself, and that's okay. I don't need my parents' approval or their money. I'm going to make it on my own, and I'm going to prove to them that they were wrong to doubt me. Looking back, I don't regret what I did. My parents needed to hear the truth, even if it hurt them. Maybe someday they'll realize how wrong they were. But even if they don't, I'm okay with that. I'm done living in their shadow. My time to shine. If you like this story, you can support the author who plays Minecraft in the background. Like and subscribe to the channel.